Good morning. Now, I think we're able to resume with Mr. Ballingall.
We are, my lord, yes. Mr. Ballingall is present.
Good morning, Mr. Ballingall.
Good morning, my lord.
Now, as you appreciate, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McIntosh, who is facing you. But first, I understand you're prepared to take the oath.
I am, yes.
Sitting where you are, could I ask you to raise your right hand and repeat these words after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Ballingall.
Thank you.
Now, you're scheduled for the morning, and we sit until 1 o'clock when we take lunch. But we usually take a coffee break at about 11:30, so there'll be a break during the morning. But if at any time you want to take a break, just give me an indication and we can take that break.
Okay, thanks.
Now, you're slightly soft-spoken. It's important that we all hear what you have to say.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's difficult to do, but could I ask you to speak a little louder, a little slower than you would in normal conversation? I mean, the microphones are there to make you audible, but if you could just bear that in mind, it would be very helpful. Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Ballingall, can I ask your full name?
John Ross Ballingall.
And did you produce a statement in response to a questionnaire we supplied to you?
I did indeed.
Are you willing to adopt that as part of your evidence?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Now, I want to take you back slightly to the past and how you described yourself at the beginning of this story. Can we go to bundle 43, volume 3, document 12 at page 517, which should be a very old photograph of you. 43, volume 3, page 517. Yes. Rather wonderfully, my colleagues have redacted your photograph, which I'm grateful for their efficiency. But I want to look at how you described yourself. I'm assuming you were involved in producing the content for this. You supplied, in a sense, who you were as project director back at the start.
Yes, I would have been.
Yeah. Now, so at the point you were project director of the Brookfield bid to build the new South Glasgow Hospital, what would you describe your role as project director to amount to?
My main role was managing the process of putting the bid together. Clearly, we had a set of exemplar designs and employers' requirements from.
And they'd come from the board.
They came from the board, and our bid had to respond to those requirements. So I put together a team of consultants and specialist contractors.
And there would also have been people from Brookfield itself.
And there'd be a big team from Brookfield.
How many people in total from Brookfield?
On the bid, probably 30.
And then if you add in the independent contractors, how many people more?
At least that again.
And when you think of the roles people playing, you describe yourself as putting together a bid. A bid obviously is part of a negotiation process. Ultimately, you're going to try and win the bid.
It's the starting point of negotiation.
What role do you see you playing in winning the contract for Brookfield?
Excuse me. Organising my team to respond in the best way that they can to the deliverables we have to produce.
Carry on, please.
But also making sure that through the dialogue process with the client team, my team are fully engaged and proactive and listening and hopefully giving the client what they want at the end of the bid process.
And in this dialogue process, which you've had quite a lot of evidence about, your team would have divided up amongst the various threads of the dialogue.
Yes.
Were you in any particular thread, or were you dipping in all of them, or did you sit back and supervise the
I
thread?
wasn't particularly in any of them.
Right.
Occasionally, I would, if I had nothing else to do, I would dip in and listen.
Was there some form of internal reporting system so each of the threads could report to you about how they were getting on?
Yes, through my design managers who did attend the various threads, and through our consultants team.
So if someone from higher up in the company contacted you, and presumably they would have done at some point, said, "How's it going, Ross?" you would have been able to know what the various threads were working on during that competitive dialogue and be able to say, well, we've had these meetings, we're doing well in this area, that sort of level of management.
Yes, so every dialogue meeting, we started with a summary of where we had got to in the last dialogue meeting, what the issues were, what the advice had been, and how we were responding to that in this subsequent dialogue meeting. So all the way through our bid preparation, I think there were 6 presentations made to the board, and they were all basically catalogued and recorded.
And these are recorded in logs?
Not in logs, just in, there was a progressive sheet that moved from one meeting to the next.
Right. And one would hope it got shorter as the issues got resolved.
Largely dealing with different issues at each meeting.
Right. So
trying to close out the issues from the last meeting, and then presenting further development of the design.
Once you become, or Brookfield becomes, the preferred bidder.
Yep.
We've obviously seen various documents, and I'll come to what some of them are as we're going through this evidence session. But I'm very conscious that we're only seeing a small subset of the documents. So what I wanted to understand from you is what you're trying to achieve as project director in the final stage before contract close, when you're a preferred bidder, but you're not yet signed, so you're still at the end of stage 1. So what are you trying to do in that period?
So is this after being appointed preferred bidder?
Yes.
So stage 2 design.
Stage 2 design.
Stage 2 design. The ultimate goal of stage 2 design was to have sufficient information in place for the board to get full business case signed off. Yeah. So that was the overall team's main goal. Beside that, my main goal was that we had enough design signed off such that from Multiplex's side, I had certainty of what we were expected to deliver.
I think I'm wanting to focus on the period before the contract is signed. So is that stage 1? Or stage 2? Have I got confused?
From memory, stage 2 was the detailed design of
stage 2 runs
the adult and children's hospital.
Preferred. So
at that point we were preferred bidder. So this is 2010.
No, I'm asking to focus on the second half of 2009.
All right.
So we understand that the board appointed Brookfield as the preferred bidder. It let go the other 2 bidders, gave them feedback. There's then a series of negotiations which culminates on the 18th of December on the contract being signed. So it's that period I'm focusing on. What would you call that period?
That was the bid.
The bid, right. So the end of the bid, when there's no other competitors, it's just you. What are you trying to achieve as project director? What's the process you're running?
Well, I'm trying to win the bid.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to ensure that what we are offering is what the client wants. I've also got to ensure that our programs are correct, our methodologies are correct, our costings are correct, our contract conditions are correct.
Yes.
So there's a load of stuff that goes together to actually make up the whole bid.
Thank you. Now I want to pick up one, and it's albeit a small part of the issue. And I'm going to do it by reference to some text that's in the contract, but I'm not attempting to analyze what the contract means. I want to ask a question based on it. If I can put up our PPP on procurement, which you might well have seen, which is bundle 26, document 3 at page 202, which simply lifts out of context a series of, page 202, a series of there we are, a series of paragraphs. And this clause is clause 5.6, control of infection, and 5.6.1, prevention and control of infection shall remain a primary consideration of the contractor in the design and the construction of the works. I'm not attempting to interpret what that means in the contract, but what I want to ask you is, in your bid team, was there anyone providing you, as the bidders, with advice on the prevention and control of infection?
The only people in our team who can do that would be the medical planners, taking guidance and trying to satisfy the hospital board's infection control team.
Right. And which company is that?
That was Tribal.
And did they remain in post after you signed the contract and started the design?
They were in place through all the medical planning process. As things get agreed, their role diminishes. So they're probably the first consultant to leave the team.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to ask about, take it off the screen, please, about the board's technical team, and your technical team and the interface between the two. I wonder we can go to volume 10 of your tender documentation, project execution plan. That's volume 40, bundle 43, volume 3, document 12 at page 503. That's bundle 43, volume 3 at page 503. So it's a little bit behind that, 503. Yes. If we go back one page to give us some context, 2 pages, we have a exciting map. Within your specialist contractors and design team, who is providing you, the bid team, with specialist advice about hospital ventilation?
Both largely ZBP or M&E contractor.
And who else might be?
Sorry, M&E consultant.
Yes. And who else might be providing a little bit of advice? You said largely.
Mercury, the specialist M&E contractor.
It'll be those two.
It's those two, yeah.
Okay. But on this plan, there's a little yellow circle called board advisors. And I wondered who you thought the board advisors on ventilation would be.
Wallace Whittle.
Now, there seems to be some debate about Wallace Whittle's involvement, so I want to just go through a series of years and ask you the same question. So before contract closed, was Wallace Whittle then?
I'm pretty sure Wallace Whittle were involved in the bid assessments.
Right. And then in 2010, in that design period, before full business case and authorization to proceed that you just talked about, who was providing ventilation advice to the board as far as you could see?
Wallace Whittle were part of the Curry and Brown team. So Curry and Brown were the lead consultant, and below them they had a team of their own consultants, medical planning, M&E, advising them.
Because it's been suggested to the inquiry that that team was stood down and any involvement was very limited after the start of 2010. What's your experience?
No. They were stood down at the start of 2011.
That's your understanding?
Yeah.
Right. And then Wallace Whittle, do they come back in about 2013? You might not be aware once you've left the project.
I had left the project.
Right, well, I won't ask you about it. I need to ask you about, take that off the screen, and go back to your statement. So this is question 9 on your statement. Which is on page 136.
All right.
Do you see how we asked you about the impact of non-compliance on patient safety and infection prevention? And then in the answer to 9A, you've said the input of the QEH infection control expert was managed by the QEH team. Multiple only be advised of any issues raised. Now, I need to understand who you think the QE infection control expert was and who the QEH team were in the context of IPC. And so Who do you think was the QEH infection control expert in 2010?
I genuinely can't remember her name.
Right,
there
well,
wa-
that narrows it down slightly. So
there was an infection control representative from the NHS team attended all of the user group meetings.
could this have been a Jackie Stewart,
That could well be her name. Yeah.
an infection control nurse?
Yeah.
So one of the things that seems important, or possibly important, is the provision of infection control device in the context of ventilation systems. Are you aware of whether GGC had someone involved in M&E meetings with an infection control interest or expertise?
I can't remember.
It's also been put to us that Ms. Stewart would have had no experience or expertise in ventilation or water systems. Would that be something that Brookfield would have been aware of?
Not necessarily, no.
Obviously it's a commercial relationship, building a hospital for somebody. From your experience, is there an impact of working with people who have a lower level of technical knowledge than you were expecting in a project?
There would be, but I don't recall having that.
You don't recall having that experience in this case?
On the Glasgow Hospital.
I want to move on to the NEC contract form. I mean, again, it's not for us to interpret the contract, but it's quite interesting to work out what people understood was going on, because it affects, I suppose, their motivations and why they did things. Could you explain to the inquiry what you understand to be the role of the project manager in an NEC 3 design and build contract?
Sorry, is it project manager or project supervisor?
Project manager.
So that would have been Curry and Brown.
Are you sure they were project
would
manager?
That have been Peter Moyer.
Which do you think it was?
If I'm brutally honest, I wouldn't have had any recollection. I suspect, having read various bundles recently, that the name Peter Moyer was probably appointed project manager after Curry and Brown were stepped down.
Right. If I asked you that question, who's the project manager, before contract sign, who would you have expected it to be once you got into the stage 2 process?
At the stage I was involved, it was Curry and Brown that were doing the project manager role.
And so there's some form of change happens there.
Curry and Brown's role was quite drastically reduced, I believe, after 2010.
Did anyone ever explain to you why that happened?
I think the hospital board felt they had the experience in-house to carry out that role, given the stage that the project had got to by that point in time. And Peter Moyer was a very experienced architect,
right,
with a lot of healthcare experience behind him.
Now, if we turn to the NEC 3 supervisor, what do you understand to be the role of the NEC 3 supervisor in a design?
The supervisor is in terms of Capita's role, their role was to inspect the works, check for compliance with ERs, witness commissioning, witness testing, and ultimately sign the building off.
So when you say compliance with ERs, that's not compliance with the construction drawings, is it?
Sorry, I was probably wrong saying compliance with ERs. They're checking compliance against the construction information.
So let's use an example. Let's imagine that an ER says that a particular part of the hospital should meet a certain standard.
Yep.
And then there's a design process, and for one reason or the other, that isn't done. Now, I'll leave the question of whether that's been approved by the health board for a moment aside. Should the NEC3 supervisor being going back to the ERs and checking them against the construction drawings?
I think in the pure NEC supervisor role, yes, they would. I think in the role that Capita had on Glasgow, that wasn't part of the remit.
Why do you think it wasn't part of their remit?
I read their witness statement.
Oh,
Uh,
I suppose that's a disadvantage.
Capita only came on board sometime through 2010. I'd very limited involvement with them. But from what I understand, the NEC supervisor would carry on checking design compliance.
With what?
Sorry?
With what?
With their team. So they would,
No, so I mean, one thing that it seems important is that
sorry, ER.
with ERs, I mean, if we step back a long way, well into the woods, one of the ER requirements is compliance with guidance. And there's a long list of guidance. You know, nodding. There's a person doing a transcript, and it would really help them if you said yes or
Yes,
no.
sorry.
So one of the employer's requirements was compliance with guidance, and there was a long list.
Yep.
And there are other employer's requirements that specify that particular guidance should apply to particular rooms.
Yes.
And then there are more narrative employer's requirements that describe what certain wards should do.
Yes.
And then there's an exemplar design that attempts to do some of that.
Yes, and that included the clinical output specs.
Yeah. And then there's your design. And that's been through the user groups.
Yes.
And then there's the technical design that's been through the technical groups. Reviewable design process. On a sort of pure understanding of what an NEC3 supervisor is supposed to do, how far back into that list of things should they be looking to check compliance?
If it was a full role, they would check it all.
And would you have read?
Sorry, just so that I understand, or maybe just check that I've heard. Question is, how far back would the supervisor go? Now, I don't think I just caught your answer to that.
They would check it all.
So all the way back to the guidance requirement in the ER.
I'm slightly unclear in my own head, because in this situation you had Curry and Brown and their team doing that through 2010, and then Capita came and became involved, and Curry and Brown's remit was reduced. Mm-hmm. So logically you would think that Capita would take over from where Curry and Brown had got to, which was basically the end of Appendix K and full business case.
So again, thinking about the pure understanding of what an NEC3 supervisor it would do, and not necessarily what Capita were asked to do. When would an NEC3 supervisor normally be appointed in a contract of this sort?
I'm not entirely sure, but I would say on appointment of the contractor.
Yes, because and this is a sort of hypothetical. So you might think it's possible, I suppose, that if you'd asked the Curry and Brown on the appointment of a contractor would have quite a detailed knowledge of the process because they've been involved.
Yep.
And there's the design stage 2 goes through that have quite detailed knowledge of that process because they've been involved.
Yes.
And then after that, the construction drawings are produced. Sometime in 11, 12.
The production continued, yes.
Yeah, and eventually you get construction drawings at the end of the process.
Yes, for all of it, yeah.
For all of it. And I'm trying to explore whether a fully instructed NEC3 supervisor would only go back as far as their appointment to look at developments, or would actually revisit the conversations and discussions and the reviewable design dialogue, the M&E logs, and right back to the employer's requirements from 2009. Would they go the whole way into the woods, or would they stop at the point when they turned up, assuming that everything had been done right to that point?
I'm not a contract specialist, but I would say that the logs and the ERs they would be interested in,
Right.
because that sets their bench line in terms of what they would have to check.
And so staying away from contract law, but staying with your practical experience, how many large procurement contracts have you built with NEC3? And is it handfuls or tens or hundreds?
Personally, I think this is the only one I've done.
Right, okay. So what's your experience of what Capita were actually doing? Your own personal experience?
As I say, I had very little involvement with them, but my understanding was that they were there effectively to check the works on site.
Against what?
Against the construction drawings.
Right. Now, what I want to do now is to spend a little bit focusing on something that you'll know this inquiry is very interested in. And it's something that we've called the agreed ventilation derogation. I appreciate it's not a derogation and you didn't call it that at the time, but we had to call it something so we could make the conversation shorter. And I wonder if we could start by looking at a page from the final M&E clarification log as signed, which is bundle 16, document 23 at page 1664. And before we do that, and look at it in detail, I want to just understand how an M&E clarification log works. And do you start with effectively a long list of issues where the word agreed doesn't appear in the fifth column, and then at the end, the word agreed should appear in every single entry? Is that the basic theory?
It basically works from left to right.
Yeah. So Watson, let's go back to find a top column. Can we go back to the first page of this document, please? There we are, that'll do. So if we look at the blue row, can you explain to us what the columns of the log are for?
Well, obviously you've got an item, you've got the board comment.
Yeah.
You've then got Brookfield comment, board comment again, agreed position, yes or no, and then basically I think it's a summary column before the final position's agreed.
And so by the end of the day, everything in the right-hand column should be green agreed?
Yes.
Yes. So if we go back to page 1664, and we're there. Let's look at the bottom entry. So the description is ward air change to be 6 air changes an hour, currently shown as 2.5 air changes an hour, which is not in compliance with SHTMO 301. There's then an agreed entry, and then Brookfield proposal as outlined within the bid submission is to incorporate chill beams as a low energy solution to control the environment, which do not rely on large volumes of treated air or variable natural ventilation. All accommodations in single bedrooms, and therefore the need for dilution of airborne microbiological contaminants should be reduced. Rooms could also be at slightly negative pressure 2 over the page corridor, providing 6 air changes is energy intensive and not necessary. And we go back 1 page. So there's then an agreed column, and it narrates the proposal is accepted on the basis of 40 litres per second per single room, 8 litres per second per second. Might that per second be wrong? Because that would be an acceleration in ventilation. But moving on, for 1 patient and 4 others.
Could you get an answer to
yes,
that?
what do you think is going on there with?
I have to say I was puzzled by second per second.
What could be? I mean, I know the contract's been signed and it's all locked in black and white. But why did it say 8 litres per second at that point?
I've never noticed that before, and I think it probably is an error.
We'll come back to it when I ask you detailed questions.
I mean, is it possible? And I appreciate this is not terribly important, but is it possible that it was intended as 8 litres per second per person?
It should be 8 litres per second per person.
Mm-hmm.
For 1 patient and 4 others, joint review to be carried out in the board in Brookfield of the over the page. energy model to determine any impact on energy target BREEAM rating. And then there's a reference to Brookfield have remained responsible for achieving the energy target BREEAM with £250,000 added to the contract sum in this regard. Negative pressure to be created in the design solution. Back to the previous page. And then there's a comment, energy model based on the agreed 2009 vision and agreed. Now, what I'm going to try and find out from you, I think it's important to give you focus, is that this seems to have been a decision that's reached in the last few days before contract signed. Are we right to understand that this is resolved late in the process?
It was, yes, it was later on in the process.
Yeah. So we're going to try and get from you what you recollect about this resolution. But what I want to do first is I want to just take you through some documents that we've unearthed that are referred to here, so that I'm giving you the full context.
Okay.
So we can go, please, to the ventilation and air treatment design strategy within volume 3 of your tender, which is bundle 18, volume 1, document 8, pages 311 to 312. Now, do you remember the production of the Brookfield tender?
Yes.
Yes. Would you have had any involvement in the production of these 2 pages?
No.
No.
No, all this would have been produced by my design team.
Right. One of the things that happens on the next page is a discussion of energy modeling for the maximum temperature in the building. When would have been the first time that you realized that this issue, as it were, existed in the procurement? That there was an attempt to get 26 degrees and there's been some modeling and you've come up with a solution. When would you have first got to that level of detail?
My understanding of thermal modelling is it can't be done properly until basically the building layout and room layouts is there. So it can't be done until effectively the 1 to 200 drawings are signed off.
And what does that mean in terms of timescale about when you would have learned about this?
The one at the start of 2010, our bid was then developed, because in our bid, the hospital shape changed.
Are you sure
became
2010?
outward facing and that sort of stuff. So the shape of the building changed. Within that, the first thing you develop is the 1 to 500 drawings, which creates and confirms all the department layouts, adjacencies, corridors, all that sort of stuff. And then you move on to 1 to 200 drawings, which basically set out the rooms within the departments. And my understanding is you can't do the thermal modelling until that 1 to 200 process is pretty much complete and the building is set.
But this document was produced in the summer of 2009 for the bid.
Yep.
So that's obviously before the early part of 2010. I'm wondering, not so much when this was created, because I appreciate that you wouldn't have been involved in creating it, but when during 2009 would someone have said to you, Ross, there's an issue around air change rates, ventilation, it's on the M&E log, we've got to resolve it. When was the first time that issue comes to your knowledge?
I'm not entirely sure. I would have thought September time.
Right.
I mean, there was some correspondence between myself and Mark Baird. I can't remember the dates.
But this document's been prepared in advance of that moment. And what I'm wanting to ask you about is an aspect of the conclusion. So, and I'm wondering if this would, well, I'll rephrase that. When you learned this was an issue in the negotiations, what steps would you have taken to brief yourself on the issue?
I was taking advice from my M&E director, Chris Lovejoy, who was briefing me on really what the issue was.
So what was the issue as you understood it?
The issue was that we, in black and white, we couldn't comply with the 6 air changes in the SHTM. And if we went for the 6 air changes, we couldn't satisfy either the energy model or the energy limits or the heat limits.
Because there's something in this final paragraph of this document that I want to show to you and ask you whether this is something that was explained to you. The conclusion,
Yep.
which we can read on
Yep.
page 312. Both sets of results show that in the wards, a mixed mode natural and mechanical ventilation combination, together with optimizing the glazed area and type, does not provide the solution to meeting the overheating criteria in the majority of the rooms. It's proposed that all ward rooms be provided with a means of mechanical cooling in the form of active chill beams as pictured below. I think they're pictured to the right. The active chill beams operate most effectively with the windows sealed, as this reduces the likelihood of condensation. And then there's a paragraph. It is envisaged that generally only small perimeter non-clinical rooms with low occupancy and low heat gains will be able to be solely naturally ventilated. Other similar but larger, more densely populated rooms will employ a mixed mode system. Then, as stated above, the majority of the clinical spaces will be mechanically ventilated or mechanically or air conditioned. And then, with the overheating design target set at 50 hours per year above 26 degrees and the summer external temperature also 26 degrees, the target is an onerous one to achieve with natural ventilation. Now that bit to there seems to be roughly what you just said to me, without reference to the energy issue. It's the final sentence that I wondered if you were aware of. In progressing the ventilation design strategy, a number of calculations have been carried out using 50 hours per year above 28 degrees, in accordance with the guidance in SHTM 0301 as the target, and it has been found that the mixed mode method is a feasible solution in the majority of the ward rooms. So I just wondered whether you were aware that going back to 28 degrees would have resolved this problem.
I probably wasn't involved in that level of detail at the time, but reading that's what it says.
Okay. Now I'm going to go and look at another log, because there's too many logs in this thing, but if we can look at bundle 17, document 56, page 2232. So not another log, it's a document called Removal of the Maximum Temperature Variant. Given the timing, which we think was June, would you have had any knowledge of GGC removing the maximum temperature variant from the bid specifications?
No, I had no knowledge of it.
Did you ever learn about it before the inquiry took an interest in this topic?
I'd have to say I don't have any recollection of it.
Then we go to the specification for ventilating systems within volume 4 of the Brookfield tender. So it's back to bundle 17. It's now document 10, page 455. And you see how there's a general statement that the mechanical ventilation and air conditioning systems will comply with the relevant clauses, and various guidances are listed, including SHTM 0301.
Yep.
Now, I appreciate that the Brookfield bid is a huge document, but how is it you can have one chapter saying we're not going to comply with SHTM 0301 and another section saying we are going to comply with SHTM 0301?
I'm not entirely sure. From what I gather now, my understanding is that SHTM 0301 allows you to calculate the air required in a room based on the individuals in that room, which is ultimately, I think, where the 40 litres per second came from.
Oh,
so I'm not an M&E engineer. Yeah, I'd probably ask the question: does our design comply with it in a different way rather than the 6 air changes per hour?
Who would have told you about that method of compliance?
To be honest, I probably read it in the last 6 months or so, in trying to understand the confusion in some of this stuff.
Because I suppose there's two possibilities here. One possibility is that this inconsistency in the bid docs between this document and the one we just looked at is not justified by a piece of methodology at the time. It's either an error or an inadvertence. That's one option.
Yeah.
And the other option is, at the time, someone's come up with a very clever way, as you just described, of making the proposed solution compliant with SHTM 0301? And are you able to tell us that in the summer of 2009, Brookfield had a justification for their solution being compliant with SHTM 0301?
No, we didn't. No. Our design team may have felt that at the time, but I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of that.
So what I want to do understand is it may be that you're going to say, ask Mr. Lovejoy, and I appreciate that might be an answer, but if we go back to the point in September 2009 when you first become aware of this issue, how were the NHS-GDC team and Curry and Brown for them reacting to this strategy of using chill beams, sealed rooms, and low air change rates?
To be honest, it wasn't a massive issue at the time.
Right.
The hospital board's exemplar had suggested the use of chill beams. So chill beams were becoming a more frequently adopted solution in hospitals, despite not requiring the 6 air changes. So yeah, there was debate about it. The NHS had Wallace Whittle involved, and yes, so Chris Lovejoy was dealing with Stuart McKechnie, and ultimately that's where the solution was deemed to be a sensible one in terms of meeting, so we say, differing requirements from the client in terms of heat and air and SHTMs.
Because, I mean, one way out of this issue is, as you describe, it's to decide we'll have chill beams and to justify it, and we'll come back to what justifications are in a moment. The other way to react might be to say, maybe we shouldn't be aiming for 26 degrees. Maybe we should be aiming for 28 degrees, as your document's final sentence puts it. Do you have any recollection of that being discussed as a possibility?
None at all.
Can I take you as an email of Mr. Hall to you on the 4th of December 2009? So that's bundle 17, document 67, page 2272. So you've been sent an updated RFI log. What's an RFI log?
Request for information log.
It's actually one of these logs of, like we looked at, of a log of issues.
Yes. So that log would have been where, from memory, if Multiplex asked the question of the NHS would reply to that. It would be called an RFI, a request.
And this is the comments too has been filled in.
They would reply to it, and that would become another log.
And then below that also attaches an M&E design summary log that asks issues around clarity.
Yep.
Does this have any connection to the dialogue around this ventilation issue?
No. The M&E log was created purely to deal with M&E design issues,
and it's not the log we've been looking at, an earlier version of it that we're looking at.
It is that log, but it wasn't created purely for ventilation.
Right.
It covered a range of M&E issues.
So if we just jump back to bundle 16, page 1664. The document that would have been sent to you on the 4th of December would have been an earlier version of this document, possibly with fewer comments on the right-hand side in some places.
So, sorry, when would that have been sent?
So the email I showed you was 4th of December.
Right.
And so am I to understand that what was being sent to you would have been an earlier version of this document with perhaps fewer agreeds and fewer comments in it? We can't tell what the differences were, but would it have been an earlier version?
Yeah, from reading David Hall's email.
Can we go back to David Hall's email just to make sure?
Yes, but the dates don't make sense.
Why do the dates not make sense?
What's the date?
4th of December, 2009.
Oh, sorry, that does make sense, yeah.
Because we also have
That does make sense.
we also have an M&E clarification log that's dated the 9th of December 2009, which presumably isn't this one, but it may be in and around the same time. It's in bundle 43, volume 2, document 21 at page 311. Now, actually, we go to the beginning of the document. Might be possible. So this seems to be a shorter version that is not yet acquired at the right-hand end.
Yeah, as I said, the logs basically started and left, and
they
columns
grow.
were added as they went through time. So sorry, going back to your last question, the one from David Hall would have been the starting point of the creation of the M&E log.
Right.
The
Would you like
final
to take some water, because you're looking like you're suffering a little bit?
The final log would have been the one completed through stage 2.
So the one that we looked at first is the one that was part of the contract. And this one is an earlier one, earlier in the process, soon after it starts on the 4th of December. Yes.
Yes.
So if we can go on to page 311, we see that there is the same description of the item is now not agreed. There is your comments. Brookfield's proposal is summarised as we had before, but now we have a GDC comment. This derogation to the SHTM03 is not accepted. Any variation would require board clinical infection control review. Now, I wanted just to ask you a couple of questions about that. Would we be entitled to infer from that comment in the right-hand column there on page 311 that at that point nobody had suggested that your solution was compliant with SHTM 0301?
Yes.
Right. Do you have any memory of the board talking about the need for clinical infection control review around this issue?
Yes, I mean, they've actually said in their comment that they require infection control review.
And I recognise it's a bit of a long shot, but do you remember any names of infection control professionals being talked about to you at this point?
No. Excuse me.
Would you like a short break? Because you seem to be sort of slightly suffering.
No, fine.
Right.
Fine.
So how did Brookfield decide to respond to this non-acceptance that we see in this row?
I think at the time, this is when the Kimmy still had naturally ventilated opening windows and 6 air changes was going through.
So is it still being discussed, that option?
I think so,
yeah. What did Brookfield team do to persuade, if that's the right word, the board to accept this aspect of the design between the 9th of December and the 18th the contract is signed?
Brookfield didn't persuade the client to take it. It wasn't a hand behind your back, this is the options. I mean, we could quite easily have reverted back to 6 air changes or increased the air changes to achieve the 26. There would have been a cost to that, but I don't think the cost was actually that relevant, given the contingency the board had. It was never particularly talked about. The main drivers were, shall we say, the varying requirements the board had.
When you say the varying requirements, what do you mean?
Energy, BREEAM, heat. There were differing requirements, and this was deemed by the board as technically the best solution.
Well, I mean, that might be the end position. I do understand that, but on this point, which is 9th of December, they're saying no, and just under 9 days later, they're saying yes. Did Brookfield provide them with any additional information that would assist them in making their minds up? I mean Brookfield, I mean your consortium.
ZBP, I mean, it did happen within a fairly short period of time.
Right.
Yeah. And ZBP were involved with Wallace Whittle, the board's M&E technical advisors, in agreeing. So ZBP gave Wallace Whittle the information that Wallace Whittle felt they needed to then advise the board that this was the sensible way to go forward.
Did you have any involvement in making that happen?
Apart from pushing Chris Lovejoy to get it resolved? Technically, no.
Well, let's look at a document which actually seems to be produced by ZBP. So it's Bundle 16, Document 21, page 1657. Bundle 16, Document 21, page 1657. Just I think it's a different bundle. No, here it is, yeah. So it's called a Ward Ventilation Design Strategy, and we'll just jump to the end of the next page, and we'll see that it doesn't have a signature, but it does have a saving location on a C drive owned by Mr. Ross. Who was Mr. Ross?
Douglas Ross was Curry and Brown's commercial director.
Right. And it also has a file name, which is it ends Dec 09. So can we presume this is a December 2009 document?
Yes, I would assume so, yeah.
We'll go back to the previous page. Before you got involved in the inquiry, had you seen this document?
Yes, I saw this at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
How
I
was it?
think I sent it to the hospital board.
Yes. Whose idea was it to create it?
I can't remember whether the board asked for it or whether we offered it, but if we offered it, it would have been Chris Lovejoy who asked ZBP to put it together.
Because the interesting thing about it, and that is what it says and what it doesn't say. So if you disagree with me, please do say, but I read it as a discussion of the options, which reaches the conclusion that the proposed solution is acceptable. Would you agree with that as a characterization?
Yes.
Yes. Does it discuss the alternative of having opening windows, all air, no chill beams that might have cost more or used more energy that you've just discussed?
Can you scroll down to the next page?
Next page, please.
And in the conclusion, it does state that within the bedrooms, with natural ventilation, air change rates will be variable depending on window opening and external conditions, and is rarely likely to achieve 6 air changes per hour. So it's basically saying natural ventilation won't give you 6 air changes anyway.
Okay, can we go back and look at your the document from the bid doc that you looked at before? So that's Bundle 18, Volume 1, page 312. That last sentence. Do you see it says there, in progressing the ventilation design strategy, a number of calculations have been carried using 50 hours a year above 28 degrees in accordance with the guidance SHT-03 as a target. And it has been found that the mixed mode method is a feasible solution in the majority of the ward rooms. Now, if we go back to the previous document, is that pitch, I suppose, in this document?
Yeah, I think the second paragraph of the conclusion is trying to say the same thing, is it not? And that it could achieve the 28 degrees.
Okay. So this document was, as you say, produced. Do you know who in ZBP produced it? Perhaps I can show you an
Specifically,
email.
no, but I would suspect Steve Pardy, who
Why don't I show you an email, which,
sorry, are you referring to the ventilation strategy?
yes, the one with
Yeah,
document.
that was Steve Pardy.
That was Steve Pardy, right. I'm just going to make sure I've got the right. You sure you don't want a break? Because you seem to be
I've got a
suffering.
bad cough. I'm afraid this has started me smoking again.
Right. Just going to make sure I've got the right document on the page. There we are. Sorry, wrong page. If we can go to bundle 17, document 70, page 2855. This appears to be part of an email exchange. And it's the main message, halfway down, third way down the page, from you to David Hall, to Mark Baird, copying Chris Lovejoy and Tim Bicknell. Who's Tim Bicknell?
Tim Bicknell was Multiplex's commercial director.
And who is Ed McIntyre?
Ed McIntyre was Mercury, the M&E Contractors project director.
So you're sending attached latest update of the M&E log. There are a couple of bits that I still need to get an answer on, but I thought I would issue anyway. I've also attached a paper by ZBP on the ward's ventilation strategy. They have discussed this with Wallace Whittle, who seem to support it. Now, I want to just check what you think about some inferences one might draw from this. Would it be a reasonable inference to draw from this that Mr. Hall and Mr. Baird don't know about the existence of the ZBP paper when you see this email?
I really don't know the answer. They were certainly involved in the discussions. But their role in the logs was really in capturing different comments from different places.
Because this is the 15th of December at 7:39 in the morning. Would you or any member of your team had meetings with Mr. Hall and Mr. Baird before this email about the ventilation issue that we've been discussing?
Chris Lovejoy would have, yeah.
Chris Lovejoy.
Or not necessarily David Hall and Mark Baird. I mean, Mark Baird would have been more aware of it than David Hall, probably. Right. Okay. So Chris's conversations were largely with Wallace Whittle. And
then the final sentence in this email, they have discussed this with Stuart at Wallace Whittle. Do you mean they, ZBP, at this point?
Yes.
And when you mean this, do you mean the issue or the paper?
Well, the paper was trying to summarise the issue.
The reason I asked that is because we've got Mr. Pardy and Mr. McKechnie giving evidence next week, and I think it would help us all if we knew whether you thought that Mr. McKechnie would have actually seen the paper at this point.
Yes.
Do you think he would have done?
Yes.
Can we go within the same?
I think the NHS relies on his guidance.
If we can go to the same bundle, page 2855. Sorry, that's the same page. We can go to 2863. Now, this isn't an email exchanging involving you, but since it provides context, I'm going to talk you through it. So it's an email from Mr. Baird and then an email from Mr. McKechnie at the top of the page to Mr. Baird at 10:04 on the 15th. So that's only a matter of hours later. And he provides some information, and we'll ask him about what that means. But what I wanted to understand is, when was this issue resolved? The issue around the ventilation, was it resolved in that morning on the 15th of December? Might there have been phone calls or meetings that we don't have records for?
From memory, the ventilation strategy was basically put together by Steve Pardy and Stuart McKechnie. So Stuart was commenting on it as it was being produced. So I don't know whether the one you've got is the first version of it. It was the first version I saw. But I think at the meetings they had before, they had discussed it and probably clarified bits in it before they sent it to us, and I sent it to the.
So they would have had a discussion.
So it was my understanding it was a done deal.
A done deal by the time you sent it?
Yeah.
But when you say a done deal, do you mean a done deal between the professionals or a done deal between the board and Brookfield?
I think no, because this email here is probably the culmination of it coming from Curry and Brown back down to Brookfield. But behind that, Stuart McKechnie had been advising the board.
And why do you know that? How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because that was happening at the time.
How would that have been known to you at the time? Were you being told by Mr. Pardy?
We were all in discussion all the time.
Were you all in the shared office at this point?
At this point, no.
No.
Although we met regularly. Alan Seaborn was heavily involved in this.
Well, we can always ask him as well. If we there seems to have been a possible meeting on the 16th between possibly Curry and Brown and probably Mr. McKechnie and people from the board about this topic, and maybe other things too, at the Hillington office. We do not have a minute.
Right.
We're still attempting to get evidence from Mr. Seaborn, Mr. Hall, Mr. McKechnie about that meeting and what was discussed. But it would assist us to know if you have any understanding of where you thought things stood on the 15th before the meeting. Had you been told this has been resolved by then, or was it still up in the air?
I genuinely don't know the answer. It had been resolved between ZBP and Wallace Whittle.
If we can take that off the screen. If we go back to the ZBP paper, which is on bundle 16, page 1657, page before. We've had a lot of people who weren't involved in writing it give evidence about what they think about it in the previous hearing block last year.
Right.
And I think it's probably a broad summary to say that the position is they don't think it covers infection control adequately. What do you feel about the argument that this process, which you were involved in, albeit not as the author of the paper, failed to properly give sufficient weight to infection control on the bidder side?
No, this was relating to general war, so this was relating to wards from level 5 up. And to my knowledge, the board would have had infection control input into this decision.
Why do you say this relates to level 5 up?
I appreciate that is slightly confusing sometimes, but that was what the conversations were about. It was general wards. It wasn't any specialist wards.
Because there is a view supported by another log, which I will come back to after the break, that this, what we've called the agreed ventilation derogation, only applies to the tower, the 4th floor and up. So why do you say the 5th?
That's just my memory of it.
Right. Ultimately,
Sorry. My understanding was that the general wards were from level 5 up.
yes, because there are general wards on level 4.
I don't know. Sorry.
The if you, in any negotiation, people reach conclusions, and we're speaking to the different sides of the negotiation, and you're giving your perspective. And in any bid documentation, there's a lot of, to put it slightly cruelly, fine words about aspirations or what you're trying to build. Do you feel that this solution that was chosen here and was proposed by your side of the negotiation provided a sufficiently quality ventilation system for this large hospital?
I don't think in the general wards there's any problem at all with the ventilation system.
But how would you respond to the suggestion that building a very large, very expensive, major hospital with its non-specialist wards having less air into them in some cases than the consultant's offices is, per patient, is frankly an inadequate product, considering how much money and effort and emotional capital was being put into this project?
It's not an inadequate product. It's not within my knowledge, but it is an increasingly common solution in modern hospitals. It's not wasteful. It's energy efficient, and I think from what I've heard, there are no problems at all with the quality of the air in general wards.
What happens in a hospital where all the general rooms are half the recommended guidance level of air when you need to move a specialist ward into a general ward for some operational reason? Does that not create a risk at that point to the patients who are moved into that general ward?
Yes, it would.
And so,
but the general wards weren't designed to be used for specialist patients.
And if you have, for example, more patients who require isolation than isolation rooms in because of something is happening in the community, and you decide to put those patients into single rooms as the next option because you've run out of isolation, could it not be that there's an increased risk to those patients because they're now in rooms, and possibly other people, with very low air change rates compared to what you would expect?
I'm not an expert in this, but air change rates and air quality air change rates don't necessarily guarantee any better air quality than chilled beams with a lower air change rate. And I mean, quite frankly, you can't keep designing and building hospitals for general wards to be used for specialist activities.
Given that a specialist ward would require, a neutropenic ward or a critical care area would require 10 air changes.
Yeah.
And I suppose is this the last way to ask the question. Does having the general wards at 3 just create too much of a step down between the two if you're thinking about future-proofing a hospital being used for 50 years or longer?
yes, you could argue that it's not flexible enough, but we weren't asked to provide that.
Okay. So I want just to put to you something that was said by one of the other bidders when they got their feedback. I think you've already actually discussed it, but we'll just look at it. So this happens to be the Lang O'Rourke response, but it's more the fact that they went through a similar process to you with a similar set of objectives. So it's bundle 43, volume 1, document 13 at page 42. Now, I should just say that this was attached to an email that's in a different place for reasons that I've now lost track of, which is bundle 43, don't put it on the screen, bundle 43, volume 2, document 16, page 60. So for my colleagues, this document was attached to an email, bundle 43, volume 2, document 16, page 60. And if we just zoom into the bottom half of the page, and do you see in this discussion, and I recognize it's not been typed with the ambition that 15 years later it'll be in a public inquiry on a screen and being put to its competitor, but the second sentence, I wonder what you thought about it. All air would be the only option when the new enhanced SHTM air rates have been adopted. A chill beam system cannot be easily integrated within the enhanced air change rates stated in the new draft document. This is from direct experience of having designed multiple hospitals across the UK using chill beams. The non-cooled all-air option was also considered the low-carbon option, but flexible enough to deal with future increases in external climate, with retrofitting of trimmer batteries from a free cooler-chiller system if required. Do you have any comment about whether you disagree or agree with the broad thrust of what one of your competitors is saying in response to their feedback?
I think that, I mean, obviously we never saw this at the time.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. I think they're basically saying the same as us, but what they're not saying is that with an all-air solution, they wouldn't be able to meet the heat gain.
Yes, so they're not saying
they wouldn't be able to meet the energy target.
They're not saying that you could hit 26 degrees or the energy target with an all-air system. They're saying you'd have to.
What they're saying is you can't hit the air changes with chill beams.
Right. Yes. Now, if we take that off the screen before we have a coffee break, I wonder what you thought about this as a proposition. There's obviously been discussion about energy gains and BREEAM. One of the things that struck me when I was reading that log and looking at the documentation is the contract benefit for BREEAM is £250,000, the award. And it must have been it's a much more expensive hospital than that. Is the interest in BREEAM efficiency financial or aspirational as a term of policy from the board?
I think it's a bit of both. I'm not a BREEAM expert, but I certainly know that if you go from the different phases of BREEAM good to BREEAM great to BREEAM excellent, the capital costs on projects is, well, in my opinion, disproportionately higher than the benefit.
So it gets very expensive to deliver BREEAM excellent buildings.
I seem to remember in the past being told that to go from whatever the one below is to go to excellent was 7% on the capital cost of a job.
And how do you react to a view that was put to me by one of the inquiry experts, which was in a consultation, which was, if you really want a green hospital, you just supply it with 100% renewable electricity. That's the way to make a green hospital, and everything else is a compromise. How would you react to that as a sort of approach to this issue?
Don't know.
Not your field. Okay,
not my field.
Lord, this might be an appropriate place to have a short break for coffee because I'm moving on to a different topic.
We will take a break. Could I just check my note and maybe ask for maybe a little bit of teasing out? I noted you maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago as and I may have misnoted you, as the air change rate doesn't necessarily reflect the air quality. Now, first of all, did I hear you correctly?
I think you did, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just tease that out a little?
I'm not, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm not an M&E engineer, but from what some of the documents say, 6 air changes with natural vent, with opening windows doesn't give you a constant quality of air. Reduced air changes with chilled beams does.
Right. That seems to me a slightly different point. I mean, I think I take if you have a mixed ventilation, natural and mechanical, I think I understand that you can't guarantee a steady air change rate, whereas if you take the natural ventilation out and you have closed windows, either simply relying on mechanical ventilation or mechanical ventilation plus chilled beams, you will get a steady rate. I think I understand that, but I was wondering if there was something more you were saying.
Yeah, I think I was referring to 6 changes with open windows.
Right. Thank you. We'll take a coffee break, and if we could be back for 20 to 12.
Please stand.
Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Ballingall, I thought I'd press you on a couple of things around the events in the run-up to the 16th or 18th of December and this issue around the ventilation of the actual beams. I wondered if any part of the GGC's work had been reported back to you, and particularly the involvement of two people who we've had some evidence might have been involved from the GGC side. And I wondered if you'd heard in this context the names of Dr. John Hood or Mr. Hoffman from the Health Protection Agency in England being discussed in December 2009.
At the time, I had no knowledge of that. I have read in a statement that
I appreciate that, but it's your knowledge that I'm keen to focus on. I also want to pick up the issue you mentioned about the 5th floor and above, as it were, the whether this agreed ventilation derogation, as we've called it, applied to the tower or to a particular subset of the wards. And there's another clarification log that I'd like to show to you. And this is in bundle, so it's not in the list given to my colleagues. So it's bundle 43, volume 6. It's document 64. And it's on page 112. So that's 46. That's definitely not it. It's on 43, volume 6. So bundle 43, volume 6, document 64, page, 1120. I missed out the 0. Yes. So the middle row here, item 10, M&E services. The question being asked is, please confirm mechanical air change rate for the ward tower. Now, what sort of document would this be if we could look at the front page of it, which is on, we've only given you an extract, sorry. Could this be an RFI type document, or?
is this the clarification log?
Yeah, it might well be, yeah.
I mean, my recollection of the clarification log was that it picked up, it was meant to pick up things that weren't M&E.
But it has this in it.
Yep.
And then there's in the 4th column, a typical ward and tower has the following air change rates to meet either the ADB requirements or achieve the environment conditions. And then it says bedrooms 2.5 air changes per hour related to ensuite extract rate and air volume for chill beam loadings, ensuite's 10, and so on. There's a list down there. And then there's a reference at the end, refer to the M&E clarification log in contract data part 2, the typical single bed ward. Now, how does this relate to the M&E clarification log in the process that generates the ultimate contract? Is this an earlier thing, or?
No, there was I think there were 5 logs in total.
Can you help us about why it's here?
It was, the logs were there to clarify where there were departures from the employer's requirements.
Because one possible question here is that this version of this row, as opposed to the M&E clarification log row itself, restricts the issue in some way, depending how you interpret it, to the tower, and the other one doesn't. The tower includes all adult wards. There's no children's wards in the tower.
Yes, that's correct.
So why do you think that the agreed ventilation derogation, as we refer to it, only applies to places either above the 5th floor or in the tower? Why do you think that?
Because it applied to general wards, and from memory, the general wards were level 5 up.
But were there not
the
general
tower.
wards in the children's hospital?
Sorry?
Were there not general wards in the children's hospital?
I don't think it applied to the children's hospital.
Because that's one of the questions. If we take that off the screen, that I'm going to show you a document that I'm almost certainly you wouldn't have seen at the time, and but I think you'll know the sort of document it is, and that is a room data sheet for a room in Ward 2A. So if we go to bundle 47, volume 3, and from memory, page 383. Let's find the right page because that isn't it. Yes, if we go to page 398. No, sorry. I looked at it yesterday with Mr. Pike. Being a Pike.
44 and 45.
No, but that'll be an isolation room, and I didn't want to show you an isolation room at this point. Here we are. Can we please go to page 427? So this is a 2011 version of a room data sheet for a single bedroom, children and young people with relatives overnight stay in the Teenage Cancer Trust accommodation section of Ward 2A, room number NCH02TCT010. And the aspect I want to draw to your attention is in the ventilation section on the environmental page. This is the second page of the room data sheet. And it's, sorry, back one page. And it's the head of the row mechanical ventilation notes. And you see how it says supply air rate at 40 litres a second. So this is a non-isolation room in a specialist ward, not in the tower. How would it be the case that 40 litres a second ends up here?
That's what I've found it.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
That's what I've just found the line you're referring to. And this is in November, 2011.
Yeah, so just to give you the background for context, we think this is a room data sheet in the reviewable design process, user groups processing that's going through in 2011. It's version 3, and it ends up being what is built. So the non-isolation rooms in Ward 2A, so the rest of the ward effectively, including the Teenage Cancer Trust, which is sort of what the first part of the ward as you enter it on the curve, all the non-isolation rooms in that ward have 40 litres a second air supply. And that's then confirmed by Mr. Lambert when he carries out the study into the replacement of the ward in 2018, and he produces a paper. So there seems to be no doubt that the individual non-isolation rooms in 2A got air at 40 litres a second, and yet you're telling me that it was your understanding that what we call the agreed ventilation derogation was only to apply either in the tower or to the general wards. How would this have happened?
I don't know. Is this one of the data sheets that was approved as?
Oh yes,
in the 500. No, sorry, in the 500 rooms that were done in 2010.
it would have been approved by GDC. I can't tell you exactly when it was approved. I would have understood if you'd asked me that it sits in with the 1 to 50s.
It was sent over to 1 to 50s, but through 2010, 500 rooms were fully loaded and room data
Yes.
sheets produced. And those 500 rooms covered every room type in the hospital.
Yes, no, we had evidence from Miss White about that.
So through 2011, the loading of the rest of the rooms would have been based on what was agreed in 2010.
Yes, but
I honestly don't know how this got to where it got to.
because the thing is that I do appreciate that in order to get built, it has to go through a number of different checks, including the user groups, the technical groups, sign off by GDC in various different ways at various different times, and ultimately review by Capita. But somebody has to suggest it. Now, Mr. Pike's evidence yesterday was that this section on the environmental, this page, and it goes over the page briefly, these numbers come off an environmental matrix, sorry, that one page, please, that is produced by ZBP and was being used by them in 2010 to do this job of populating out the room data sheets and the drawings and iterating out the hospital. And what I'm keen to understand is how it is that somebody on the contractor side suggested to GGC in the form of proposals that the children's ward 2A outside data rooms got 40 litres a second when that wasn't what you think was agreed in the M&E clarification log.
I don't know the answer to it, but the environmental matrix, from my recollection, is actually fed from the room data sheets that were previously agreed. So the environmental matrix, I think, would have been produced from the data sheets produced in 2010. I might be wrong, but that's my recollection.
I appreciate that might well be the case, but originally, at the very start of this process, somebody has to take what's agreed in the contract and is in the M&E log and apply it to the rest of the design.
Yes.
And you might argue about whether they should have applied it to the general wards in the tower on the basis, is it a good idea? But no one seems to disagree that it was what was agreed, because it's in the M&E log, and the M&E log definitely refers to the tower. So it might not be a good idea, but it's definitely agreed. But in this context, there is a viewpoint which you seem to hold, that the M&E log only applies to general wards and or the tower, and yet this isn't a general ward. This is the National Pediatric Hemato-Oncology ward, and it's getting 40 litres a second. Somebody had to originally suggest that. I mean, I appreciate we have a conversation with people who fail to spot it down the track, but someone suggested, how would that have happened?
I don't know, but it should have been picked up through the user groups and reviews.
Yes, except there's a problem with these sheets. Now, every single one of these sheets, with a few minor exceptions, for bedrooms, fails to enclose numbers for extract and supply air. So if you are a clinician attending a user group meeting and you've been supplied with a version of this room data sheet for any room in the hospital, you don't get told what the supply air rate is or what the extract air rate is. Now, it may not have been on the agenda for the user group, that may be something for the technical meetings, but the consultants never see this. So is there not a possibility that by having blank room data sheets on these two fields, somebody has to work out what 40 litres a second means in order to decide that there's a problem? Do you see that as a disadvantage in some way?
It could be clearer.
Yeah. Now, what I want to do now is, since we're on this topic, let's go and look at Ward 4B. So this is Bundle 47, Volume 1, Document 7, page 44. And this is a 2011 version of the adult hematology oncology ward. Now, this is in the tower. And there is a clinical output specification for it that doesn't reference the air change rate. I would emphasize that. But it does describe specialist ventilation. Can you explain how 40 litres a second would have ended up in this design? This wasn't built, incidentally.
No,
Because
I wasn't involved in this level of detail.
right. But the thing that concerns me, Mr. Ballingall, is that I do appreciate you weren't involved. We take it off the screen, but there seems to have been a system designed which involves somebody taking the contract, the employer's requirements, the M&E logs, turning it into room data sheets, initial designs, and as you described, stepping down 200s, 1-50s, and out finally to build construction drawings. And there seems to have been a requirement for GGC to check these through user groups and technical groups. And you'd agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And somehow 40 litres a second has made it into somewhere that's not in the tower and is a specialist ward 2A, and somewhere that is in the tower but is a specialist ward, the original old 4B before it was upgraded. And the air change rates are not recorded in the room data sheets. And so would you accept that there is a possibility that that failure to include the numbers in the room data sheets might have contributed to people not spotting the actual air rates on the construction drawings as important?
I think the technical aspects in the data sheets were largely dealt with through 2010 when they were loading 500 rooms. At that time, the technical review was Curry and Brown's team. So you had technical people looking at technical information. I get what you're saying about clinicians not understanding it, but I wouldn't agree that technical people could claim they didn't understand it.
So your position is if you're not, I agree, you're not conceding there's a mistake here, but if there's a mistake, that should have been spotted by the GGC technical team.
It could have been, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's worth perhaps just discussing something you say in your statement about technical teams. Can we go to your statement, question 15, which is on page 141, top of the page. And you ask we're asking who in the project team did you see in the board were aware of the ventilation derogations, we've called it. And you've named Mr. Seaborn, Mr. McKechnie, Mr. Baird, and we've discussed then. And you assume Marion McLeod and Heather Griffin. Now, they maintain that they weren't aware of it. Why do you assume they would have been aware of it?
Purely because they were the two project managers looking after the review process. I said I assume. I might be wrong.
What did you see their role as project managers? Because there's been some debate about what sort of project managers they are.
They were basically running the user group process.
So it doesn't sound like that's a full project management role.
They weren't technical people. They were health. I think they were nurses. So they were managing the user groups to make sure that everybody from the health board side that everybody had to be there was there.
So in this 2010 process, when you were still there, who were outside Wallace Whittle, who we've already discussed, who were the technical people on the GGC side?
There weren't any others. They had the team under Curry and Brown.
And that's all?
Yeah.
You wouldn't count Mr. Moyer as part of a technical skill team?
Well, he had technical skills, but at that time he wasn't employed to review the design, to my knowledge.
And once Wallace Whittle and the rest of the Curry and Brown team have gone, who is the technical advice to the board in the process?
I think the board's view was that Peter would supply some of it, or they would bring it in as and when needed. But if you think about the fact that 500 rooms were fully loaded and agreed, the other X so many hundreds of rooms, the loading of them is repetition. So, you know, the main technical review was done during 2010. It then becomes repetitive, and then starts flowing through into construction information.
But don't you lose the opportunity to pick up on things you failed to spot in 10 if you don't have a technical team?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to turn to an issue that relates to Ward 4B, and it's in the hope that you might have able to help us with a rather unusual little event. So this relates to the old 4B, the one that was never built, that was going to be an adult haematology ward that we just looked at our own data sheet for. Do you recollect that earlier?
I had zero involvement in. I wasn't there at the time. But
Well,
carry on.
but that was in 2013, but you were there in June 2010.
I was in 2010. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm looking at the old version. So there's a change in 2013 to bring a bone marrow treatment ward in, and you weren't involved in that. I appreciate that. But I'm looking at the stage 2 process after contract sign, before authorization to proceed, when there is something happens around the haematology ward that's going to be built, that's included in the original design, original bid.
Right.
And so if we can just set that up by looking at bundle 16, document 15, page 1595, which is the clinical output specification. This is the clinical output specification for this haematology ward. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting you to have looked at this at the time, but I'll get there to the question in a moment. You see at the bottom of the document, it describes some ventilation, and it says the ward has a very specific function, considerably higher than average requirement for additional engineering support, and it says there should be no opening windows, no chill beams, space sealed and ventilated, positive pressure the rest of the hospital, and all highly filtered air greater than 90%, probably best HEPA with adequate number of positive pressure sealed HEPA filtered side rooms for neutropenic patients, as at the Beats and Scotland Cancer Centre. So the first question is, do you remember whether it was the practice of your designers to go and look at the facilities that were being moved into the new hospital to sort of check out what they had before?
It wouldn't have been done routinely, no.
Why not?
Because the requirements are clarified in the clinical output spec.
So you'd accept that this clinical output specification, I mean, you haven't seen it before, but it talks about HEPA filters being an issue in this ward. And the reason I asked that
It's suggesting HEPA filters be included, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is there was a PMI for removal of this requirement, and we'd like to see if we can understand whether you knew about it. So it's bundle 16, document 24, page 1674. So this is a PMI, which appears potentially to have been generated by Mr. Moyer, but we can't speak to Mr. Moyer, he's not well.
Yep.
And it relates to title PMI General 21, Hemato-Oncology Ward, alteration requirement, board requirements for M&E services. The board confirms that 8 no number single rooms no longer require HEPA filter as originally supplied. Now, the current Nightingale layout, and we're inferring that's designed by Nightingale, reflects the board requirements for room split between hemato-oncology beds and the remainder of the ward. Now, do you have any recollection of this change happening around this specialist ward?
I didn't have this level of detail at the time, but from what I've seen, they were removed because the use of the 8 rooms was changed.
But the rest of the ward, would that have remained HEPA filtered according to this document?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Now, if we take it off the screen, by the time the hospital opened, you held a more senior job in multiplex.
Yes.
What was your title in 2015?
I was managing director.
Yes. So the opening of the hospital, Queen and a lot of fanfare and publicity, would have been a major event.
It was a major event.
Yes. And so a few months later, the adult BMT patient cohort moved into the hospital, and then less than 5 weeks later, moved out again. And I wondered if you heard about that at the time.
Nope.
Because would it not be slightly remarkable that a major service like that goes into a new world-beating hospital and then leaves? You weren't told about it.
I didn't know about it. I don't know why they left.
When was the first time that you became aware, to keep it at a very sort of high level, that there were issues around the building at Queen Elizabeth?
Obviously, I still had a team involved who brought a couple of issues to my knowledge, but nothing that really alarmed me.
What sort of issues did they bring to your attention?
An issue with Shallon and an issue with some water.
And what was the issue with Shahalian?
I honestly can't remember. I mean,
Could it have related to the presence or absence of HEPA filtration in isolation rooms?
no, I wouldn't. I would not in that detail. No.
No. And the issue about the water, can you remember what that was?
It was to do with quality of water, which, and I was assured in both cases that neither of them were our issue.
How would the company have known that the quality of water was not its issue?
The quality of water is our issue when we hand the building over. Yeah, it's then.
No, but I mean, how would you have known that you handed over water that was of a good quality?
Because we would have commissioning records of it.
Right. When did you leave Multiplex?
I ultimately left in 2020, but I stopped being MD in 2018.
Right, because one of the issues that, from your perspective as MD, when did, well, it may not have arisen before you left, but when did the question of whether the hospital had been properly built or properly handed over, or the way you phrase it, come to your attention as an issue you needed to take interest in?
Probably not until 2019.
19.
Yeah, I mean, I had a team of guys in Scotland, and a director in Scotland who was dealing with whatever came up, and there was nothing particularly flagged to me.
Was anything ever flagged to you about ventilation being an issue at any point between the hospital opening and 2019?
So
between the hospital opening and handover in 2015 and 2019, did your guys in Scotland come to you with issues around ventilation in the hospital?
They said that there were issues with patients caused by ventilation, and I think Multiplex were paid to do some more work in certain wards.
Can you help us about roughly when that might have been?
16, 17.
16, 17. Might it have related to the bone marrow treatment ward?
Don't know.
You don't know. I must just check the document before I put it to you. My computer will go slow at this point. Yes, so it relates to the Appendix K process and the full business case and the authorization to proceed. So when did you leave the project?
End of 2010.
So had authorization to proceed happened before you left?
Yes.
Right. Can you help us understand what Multiplex and your team are trying to achieve through the Appendix K process?
The Appendix K process was really a board process, but its primary objective was to give the NHS board the information that they absolutely required to go for a full business case. And then secondly, further information that they wanted to see.
Sorry, I missed the second objective.
Information that the board wanted to see. So it wasn't required for full business case, but wanted to see.
And is there a list of things that's required in Appendix K in the employer's document that it arises from?
I can't remember if it was in the employer's requirements, but it was agreed in 2010 as basically the objectives of. It might have been agreed in 2009. I can't remember, but it was basically the objectives for stage 2.
Would that have included any certification that guidance was being followed?
It was largely design information. It was, where guidance was not being followed, people were aware of.
Would the project team, that's Mr. Seaborn and Mr. Moyer and the 2 deputies and Francis Rath, in your eyes, would some of them have known about that the building wasn't compliant with SHTMO 301 because of this air change rate decision?
They all knew.
They all knew. So did effectively the contract allow for the Scottish Government to refuse to approve full business case?
Yes.
Was that in any way constrained, or that they limited for their reasons they could do it, or?
No idea. That was a matter for the board.
But in terms of you agree the contract, once you signed the contract in 2009, you knew you had to go through a further hoop before you could actually.
Yes.
And so.
Yeah, we could have been put down at 2010.
Yes, and presumably there would have been some compensation payable, but it could have been done.
Well, we'd have been paid for the work we did to date.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wonder if we look at the Gateway 3 review. So that's Bundle 43, Volume 2, Document 33, page 348. Did you have any role in the Gateway 3 review? Were you interviewed by the reviewers?
I don't have any great memory of it, but I believe I was interviewed as part of it.
If we look at page 355, there's a discussion in 4.4 of which the authors describe the current phase of the project has been dominated by a highly focused procurement process. Let's use the competitive dialogue procurement. And then there's a mention in the middle of the paragraph that the competitive dialogue period was shorter than typically found. 4 months compared with a total of 9. The total of 9 months compared to a normal total of 18 months. And they describe the approach as being highly effective and efficient. Was that something you would agree with, or from your experience with these competitive dialogues?
To be brutally honest, no contractor wants competitive dialogue to go on for too long, because the contractor's at financial risk and putting significant amount of money into bidding a job. So, 4 months to us is better than 18, as long as it gives the level of certainty over what's being bid. The bid period was intense. There's no doubt about that. There was huge amounts of information produced, and I said earlier, the size of team. So there was a big commitment on part of all 3 bidders to get the information required as part of their bids within that period.
How would you respond to the suggestion that the speed of this process might have contributed to a failure to fully inform people in the board of this particular change around the ventilation system? Or would you not accept there was a failure to inform the people on the board around it?
It wasn't an out of control process. It was a very streamlined, thorough process.
You felt it was in control.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And from your point of view, did you feel, as the project director, that you had full control over the process from your side?
Yes.
Do you feel that Mr. Moyer had control of the process from his side?
I think it was probably more Alan Seaborn, but yeah, they both had control. Yeah.
We discussed earlier on, I put to you there may be issues around not having room data sheets contain air change rates. And another issue has been found within the minutes. It's about room layouts and room elevations.
Yep.
If we can go to the project management group meeting on the 18th of January 2011, bundle 31, document 23, page 147. So this is a meeting. We go back to the previous page, one more. Well, there we are. 18th of January 2011, you are reported as being present along with a lot of other people.
Yep.
And if we jump forward to page 147, there's a discussion about the 1 to 50 program. And within it, did you read this as part of your preparation for today?
I've read this. Yeah.
Yeah. So would it appear to involve a suggestion by Mr. Ross that elevations be included in the drawings provided to the user groups? And your suggestion is that's not normal.
Yes.
Why were you reluctant to agree to the request that was being made?
This was 2011. So at this time, we were agreeing the programme for the loading of all the other hundreds and hundreds of rooms that were to be loaded.
But this is after the 500 have been done.
Yeah. So they were to be repeated as you went forward. From me looking at construction information and the information I needed to design everything else, where a toilet roll holder goes wasn't particularly important. So yes, elevations are important, particularly in critical rooms, but you don't have to have elevations for every room in the hospital to understand what's happening.
Would elevations have shown the ventilation system for rooms?
No.
Where would the ventilation system have been in the elevation?
Generally in the ceiling.
And would that not be within the elevation you would capture at this point?
No.
I have to confess, I don't know what a room elevation is.
Basically, it's a drawing of that wall.
Right.
Would it include the space?
You have the purpose of them is to try and give people looking at the drawings an easier understanding of how the room works, because looking at a plan of a room doesn't necessarily tell you the height of fixtures and all that sort of stuff. So,
Thank you.
Would it have gone above the suspended ceiling?
What
the elevation?
No.
No. Okay. I want to ask a general question about commissioning and validation. Appreciate the time you were managing director of Multiplex, but it's more sort of policy level issue. A number of your team have expressed the view that validation was not a responsibility of Multiplex. I take it you'd agree with that? No. What about the idea that it would be prudent to allow for validation in the program so that it doesn't delay handover and other parts of the project?
Validation wouldn't delay handover because it's a matter for the board post handover. Historically.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
So you wouldn't see validation as something the board would do before they accept the building?
No.
Why not?
I'm not sure there's a contractor would support that on the basis that well, no. Would I support it? If it was properly controlled, yes. But
what are the issues that you're concerned about?
Well, hospitals are never actually finished when they're handed over, because there's still significant amounts of equipment to be put in, final test done, and that's when validation's done, when it's all the equipment's in and it is finished.
Right.
So, you know, multiplex commission to the construction information.
Well, that was the other question, which I had a long and useful discussion with Mr. Wilson about this yesterday. I don't know whether did you watch any of his evidence?
No.
No. I hope I'll repeat this correctly, but the point I put to him was that he explained that in a room, say an isolation room, he would validate the whole system up to the grill, effectively, whether the right amount of air.
You've used the word validate. Did you mean to?
Yeah, commission. Sorry, my lord. He would commission up to the grill. He would check the whole system produces the amount of air at the grill that it's supposed to, and extracts the amount of air from the extract. But he wouldn't commission the whole room, in the sense back then, to check that the ceiling was sealed. He would check the individual bits of equipment. I think that's a reasonably accurate description of his evidence. Should not commissioning or the contractor at least check that the room performs as designed, as opposed to commission the individual bits of equipment?
Yes, and by checking the flows in and out, he's doing that.
But also checking, because I don't know how much of this you understand, but there is we've had evidence that if you build a positive pressure ventilated lobby room in compliance with HBN 04 and SHPN 04, doing it exactly right is very important if you want to achieve the air movements and the pressure differentials that are necessary for the room to do its job. Is that something you've been aware of?
It's out with my...
Right. But it would therefore mean that it's quite important to test that the room, for someone, I appreciate this is a question, for someone to test the room does what it's supposed to do, that there is a pressure gradient in a particular direction, not in another direction.
I would expect that to be part of commissioning.
Right. It's helpful. One of the issues that appears to have arisen is that the contract allowed for an independent commissioning engineer. Was that something you were aware of at the time?
Not massively, no.
I mean, the reason I ask it is because it might be it's not a standard term in the NEC3 contract, and therefore it was a bespoke suggestion here. Do you know how it arose?
No.
No. Have you ever come across independent commissioning engineers in other contracts?
They exist from the projects I've personally worked on. They weren't there, but they were different forms of contract.
Okay. I think I appreciate this might be something you wouldn't have seen, but I think I need to put it to you just in case it was, which is the Stage 3 Sectional Completion Certificate from Bundle 12, Document 3, page 23, which is signed in 2015. Now, I take it you wouldn't have seen this at the time because you were long gone. I wonder if we can just step onto the next page. And then there's a capita form. Now onto the next page. That's interesting. I think I referred you to the wrong sectional completion certificate. I will look for that in a moment. I'll come back to my final questions. Take that off the screen. I suppose since you were the project director in the early days, at the time when the technical matters were largely, as you say, determined, I should put to you a series of questions. I think you've answered many of them, but I think it would be appropriate to catch them at this point. What is your explanation for how it was that all the single rooms that weren't isolation rooms in this hospital have air supplied to them through chill beams, such as the air change rate was half of that recommended by the Scottish Government Guidance SHTM 0301 2009?
What is my explanation?
Yes.
There were not conflicting, but differing requirements that could not be achieved complying with the SHTM. So the balance of getting the best result that the board could get for the differing requirements was the use of chill beams with a reduced air rate. And the reduced air rate with chill beams doesn't reduce the quality of air in the general ward.
And whose idea was this, and who accepted it?
Well, the original invitation to participate in dialogue asked the bidders to consider the use of chill beams.
Right.
So my team used, and I'm sure all the other teams considered it as well.
My next question relates to the adult BMT unit that was built. And was criticised such by its consultants and its clinicians for lack of air change rate and lack of filters, that it only stayed for 5 weeks before returning to their old hospital. How did that come about?
I've got no idea, so.
And that's because you weren't there at the time.
Yeah.
I think we've all discussed this, but I think I should pick it up. How was it that well, actually, we haven't discussed this. I think I know what your answer's going to be, but actually, for completeness, how was it that the isolation rooms in the paediatric hematology unit, Schehallien, were built as positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms, according to guidance which says they're not suitable for immunocompromised patients?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know when that decision would have been made?
No.
Because during that time in 2009-10, were you involved in any discussions about the nature of the isolation rooms in the hospital?
No. But the position of the isolation rooms would have been agreed through that process.
Right. There is a hypothesis that the reason the isolation rooms were built as positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms has its origins in the employer's requirements. Is that something you've ever been involved in?
No.
No.
Not that detail, no.
I mean, maybe you draw no lessons, but if you do, what lessons do you draw from the procurement of the construction of this hospital?
I think the procurement and design development process were pretty well done. I think you could argue that a technical team post 2011 would maybe have identified any issues, and I think the question of validation is one to be answered, to be honest.
So just to drill into that, you feel that when you say the technical team should have spotted or might have spotted some issues, which technical team?
Having a technical team on the client side
is important in your mind.
The clients are responsible for clinical functionality, so they'll always argue that they're not technically responsible. Contractually, that's the case, but yeah, as you said, somebody who understands 40 litres as opposed to 2.5 air changes is a different beast. So you could argue that it would have helped
to have a technical team on the client side. And when it comes to validation, do you see there's some value in having a system of validation required for these sort of buildings?
Validation is required.
Yes.
Yeah, whether it was done or not, but yeah, there was a requirement in the job to produce a joint commissioning program.
Yes.
Now, a joint commissioning program is not just a contractor's program; it's an entire team program based on how do we actually get to being operational. Now, I was involved in the very early meetings on that, so I know that it was being produced. But what it ended up as and what it was used for, I've got no idea. But the intention of it was that it was used to take the hospital from being a building site to being an operational hospital.
Thank you. I'm just going to find one more document. Computer's being a bit slow. I wonder if we can look at a letter from 2019. So that's bundle 43, volume 4, page 359. This is a letter from Mr. Professor Steele to you in March 2019. Do you remember receiving this letter?
I don't actually, but I remember having dialogue with Tom Steele. Yeah.
What did you do after receipt of this letter?
I think prior to this letter, I'd already met Tom Steele. John Ballantyne, who was my director in Scotland, asked me to attend the meeting with him.
And when was that?
I can't remember exactly, but I think it was before this. It was either before this or just after it. It might have been just after.
Did the company provide any information to the independent review?
I offered far more than that, and it wasn't taken up.
What did you offer?
I offered for my team to work exclusively with ACOM through every issue that Mr. Steele had, and if there were multiple issues, I would have them resolved. But that didn't suit Mr. Steele's intentions. So,
before this date, you had the meeting that might have happened before this date with Professor Steele. Before that, what knowledge do you have of these issues?
I didn't particularly have any.
Okay. Thank
And
you
these
very much.
issues are still not resolved 6 years later, to my knowledge.
Well, Lord, if we take it off the screen, I do have one question which I need to find, but I think this might be a good point to see if anyone in the room has any further questions.
Very well. Ms. Ballingall, I need to find out whether there's any questions that anyone in the room wishes to raise. And Mr. McIntosh has explained he needs to check his notes. So can I ask you to return
Absolutely.
to the witness room for 10 or so minutes? I understand maybe just one question, Mr. Ballingall.
Yes, Mr. Ballingall. It's the position advanced by Curry and Brown that in January 2010, they stood down their technical team of, including Wallace Whittle, and there was no technical team working to them in 2010. It's fair to say that Mr. Pike gave slightly different evidence yesterday. He pointed out there was a meeting in August, 2 meetings in August 2010 to which Wallace Whittle attended. So I wonder what your recollection is of how and where you would have seen Wallace Whittle in 2010.
Wallace Whittle were sorry, Curry and Brown were definitely. Sorry, are you saying Wallace Whittle were stepped down or
Yeah,
Curry and Brown?
Curry and Brown was still there, but in a different role. So effectively, this is that narrative. They had a technical team, which was around in 2009 when you're negotiating the contract. We've heard evidence about that. After the contract is signed, it is decided not to retain Curry and Brown as was intended in the full role. Their role is restricted, and at that time they then stand down their healthcare planners, their architect advisors, and Wallace Whittle as their M&E engineers. There's some evidence of a small involvement of Wallace Whittle at various points after that, but there is no technical team as such. And that's what I'm putting to you. How do you know there's a technical team? What's your own evidence?
I mean, I wasn't involved in user group meetings or technical meetings, but I thought they were part of the process of getting all the Appendix K information together and approved with the ERs.
Because the reason, I mean, you're looking puzzled, and therefore I want to help you out.
I'm puzzled now.
Can we look at bundle 40, please? And a series of minutes, but we'll look at the technical design group, page 354, document 119. So there are a total of 11 meetings of this technical design group in 2010, which morphed into the medical planning and the technical design group. And the odd thing about it is that whilst your side is represented, as you can see at this first meeting, and if we just happen to jump to the last one on page 424, we see that that's still the case. Do you see how distribution doesn't include an engineer from the client side? And so the question is, and intriguingly, all in these minutes, whenever there's an entry in the agenda of M&E, and there's never anything in it. So where are you thinking? Why are you thinking there's an M&E advisor to the client in 2010?
I don't know. It was 15 years ago. They may have stepped them down on the basis that the main principles of the design were established 2009.
No, I understand they might have a reason. It's more to try and dig into.
Ultimately, the board are not responsible for the technical design. Multiplex are.
I appreciate that, but I'd like to just try again. It is 15 years ago. Just sort of push your mind back to then and think, well, why do I think that they were there? Why do you think they were there? You did say they were there, so why do you think they were there?
I did think they were there. I just thought they were part of the review process.
Right.
Of all the work that was done up until full business case.
And you've not seen...
My memory might be completely wrong.
Have you seen, as part of your preparation for this hearing, any documents that would suggest they were part of the review process? Sign-offs, minutes?
I think I saw the comments in the environmental matrix. Now, whether that was 2009 or 2010, I don't know.
So that would be something that we haven't seen?
No, because I'd have seen them in a bundle. So
if you had access...
It would have been something sent to me.
Right. Well, I'll
I'm
explore.
pretty sure they commented in Appendix K.
Appendix K, right? Yes. Okay. So you think there'll be in Appendix K commentary?
I think so, whether it was 2009 or 10.
Right. Well, we'll have a
Can't be
look
sure.
in the versions of Appendix K that we have to see if there's a Wallace Whittle comment. With that, I've got no further questions, my lord.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Mr. Ballingall, that is the end of your evidence and you're free to go. But before you do go, can I thank you for your preparation work, which involves responding to the questionnaire,
Yep.
the reading involved, and your attendance today. Thank you for that, but you're now free to go.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.